Thank you all for joining today's FRH talk. The talk is focused on the role of digital humanities in cultural heritage documentation, accessibility, and preservation. One of a very key and emblematic project in this topic, let's say, is the Baptisteria Sacra Index, an iconographical index of baptismal fonts. It's a pioneering in-process digital humanities project at the University of Toronto in Canada, hosted by the Digital Research Alliance of Canada, which was launched this year. And for that, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Harriet Sonne de Torrens, who's the founder and co-director of the Baptisteria Sacra Index, along with Miguel Torrens. Harriet Sonne de Torrens is an expert in an academic librarian specifically, and visual resource specialist, medievalist, and art historian who manages the Visual Resource Library in the Department of Visual Studies and at the University of Toronto. And she also manages the collection department in cinema, art history, and visual studies at the same university, UTN. And she specialized in 12th and 13th century iconography, Baltic and Scandinavian studies, and the historical production of baptismal fonts. So, Harriet, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jordi and Theo, for organizing this. We are very grateful for your invitation. And indeed, we are delighted to be here today to speak to you about our digital humanities project, the Baptisteria Sacra Index, which, as Jordi said, documents baptismal fonts, cultural heritage objects from the late antiquity roughly to the 17th century. These are used by communities for the baptismal ritual. These vessels hold the water. Our project has just been launched, global access, online, open access, the first of a few, we hope, as we have to deal with some fix-its and hopefully some refinements over the next few months. We are working, as Jordi mentioned, we are working with the Digital Research Alliance of Canada, as well as colleagues from Sigtica, who are maintaining and helping us design this project online for user access. We, meaning myself and my co-director and partner in life, Miguel Torrens, who is with us here today, we have been working on this project for 27 years. Now, some of you may not have been, I'm not sure, but some of you may not have been born 27 years ago. But at that time, there was no keywords. Nobody was using GIS for mapping. And storage space was extraordinarily expensive. And this was a time when we were excited about zip disks. So we have come a long way. But from the beginning, we have documented these works to ensure their preservation and to share knowledge about them. These objects are not in museums. They are in communities. Most are largely unknown and seldom part of the mainstream discussions in academic scholarship. We believe that BSI is unique from several perspectives. First, it is a global collection, unlike many of the historical collections, which are regional or national. So we hope to bring hidden knowledge about these vessels that cross national, regional borders as well. Over the years, the technical advances have progressed considerably, as you know, of course, especially in the way cultural heritage is documented and preserved. I should note that BSI is an organic, living database that we continue to add new data to. It is not complete, it is ongoing, which of course poses its own challenges in terms of technology. BSI has been modified many times, and as I will explain at the end of this presentation, we are venturing down yet another path on this long journey in anticipation or hopes of preserving the material for the future. My presentation will introduce the foundations of BSI, its origins, and our community outreach, the temporal, material, and the geographical scope, as well as the unexpected discoveries that are preserved in communities across the EU, UK, and regions of North America, South America, etc. This will be followed by an overview of the BSI database structure, the way in which the material culture is transformed into structured semantic metadata, and how we address copyright issues, as well as our next steps. Just going to change the slide here, get this going. I'd like to start by acknowledging the foundational work on which that BSI is based on. It began as an academic project and hence required the documentation of specific details, and I cannot stress that enough, at least whenever they are available. The extensive metadata which we have parsed in an SQL database originates from academic perspectives and the needs of researchers who investigate different aspects of these objects and their history in the communities. The monumental scholarship of previous fonters, a term coined by the late Colin Drake, was the foundational basis for BSI. The academic methodologies that are employed by historians, art historians, medievalists, liturgists, and those working in the field essentially have structured the SQL relational database. BSI is founded on the 19th century surveys by antiquarians, historians, and aficionados who, without cameras at this time, but carefully drew the details of many fonts which today, unfortunately, are now lost due to the subsequent world wars. This was followed by the massive surveys undertaken at the beginning of the 20th century with the camera in tow by historians through until the mid-20th century. And these are often regional endeavors, but major in print publications, of which have been incorporated into BSI. Miguel and I were particularly influenced by the late Leonard Carlson in Sweden, who undertook the task of documenting medieval works of art in Swedish churches. And he was really our inspiration. His van, fully equipped van, in which he traveled and slept, and he had this incredible camera equipment, really was, which we were very envious of course. He was quite inspirational, and he taught us how to do on-site work very early on this project. His work, in fact, is available today. There's an image of his website. You can search this today at the Historical Museum in Stockholm. It's in Swedish, but it's quite easy to navigate. He was a professional photographer, and so the images are remarkable. And I have to mention that photography inside churches is very tricky. Constantly changing light, colors from stained glass windows, etc., makes it exceedingly difficult. In addition, over the years, the BSI project has established an international network of fonters, citizen scholars, who submit material to us regularly from around the world. With gratitude and deep appreciation, we thank our fellow fonters who are acknowledged on each font record that they have contributed to. The slide before you lists just a few of the long-standing fonters who contribute ongoing information. And I have to say that their efforts and their work is the backbone of BSI. The BSI project began in 1997 with my doctoral research at the University of Copenhagen. At that time, I found the hundreds of images overwhelming to work with and assess manually, so a relational database was formed. And since then, in 2024, with expanded interdisciplinary perspectives, this material was published in the book, The Crusader Rhetoric and the Infancy Cycles, published by Brepols in 2024. I mentioned this partly because I want to stress the importance of using technology when you're dealing with a large corpus of material. And what was became evident was that the production of pictorial programs with 3 or more infancy cycles was specifically a northern trend. It does not occur to the same extent in other regions of Europe, and I am able to link this to the ambitions of the Northern Baltic Crusade at that time in this book. So technology in analyzing large corpuses of material can reveal unexpected patterns that we cannot do manually. That's the great benefit of it. I also would like to mention that we do work in communities, and it is extremely valuable for us. We have been welcomed many times, as well as our fellow colleague Fonters and their regional community work as well, when they obtain access and permissions to photograph and study these vessels. And one of the, I think, more rewarding aspects of this is there is a common interest shared by all of the communities that they want to know more. They want to know more about this vessel. And for us, this is always enriching and rewarding. And we hope that with time, the database might offer some more information. And most of the time, they have no real understanding of the importance of the most simple, unadorned stone vessel and what that stone vessel can tell them by size, by type of stone, about the history of their community and their relationship with the different regions. And of course, many of these works that we encounter are never discussed in academia because the challenges, of course, of working on site in all of these locations can be a bit overwhelming and difficult at times for many. Now, the BSI corpus dates from late antiquity to the 17th century, and it begins really with the early centuries when the communities transitioned from Roman and non-Christian belief systems. Some of the earliest works, for example, are repurposed sites. We encounter that quite a lot, such as the venerated holy wells that today we know of. Well, we also know they were venerated pagan sites. And certainly the earliest sunken piscinae in the beginning of the establishment of Christianity were modeled on the Jewish mikvah. Both required the living water, the moving fresh water. This also accounts for why certain Roman baths were appropriated for Christian piscinae, at least some aspects of them. And of course, we all know they had this incredible plumbing for fresh water. And as the generations became Christian and the movement of Christianity moved further north, the above ground vessels were designed here, as you see some of them. And these, of course, are for infants rather than adults. And these vessels came with the development of quarries in many regions and the escalation of a massive stone industry at this time, which simultaneously supported the construction of ashlar churches and the carving of stone fonts across Europe at that time, with workshops, etc. So it's quite an industry. Pardon me. And with this vast network of activity came maritime trade routes, and of course, new designs for ships, the cog, to transport all of this stonework. The BSI database uses established terminology to identify the stylistic periods and controlled subject vocabulary for the metadata which we enter for each font. Sources over the years have shifted somewhat depending on the scope of the schema, but certainly icon class and the Getty controlled schema have been valuable at different stages. One of the surprising features of our work has been the widespread discovery of communities repurposing objects. or used objects from previous cultures. And we've seen this across the EU. We've seen this in Central America, Mexico, etc. Communities have preserved some extraordinary works over the centuries, some of them quite unknown, and converted them into these liturgical vessels. It was either for practical, aesthetic reasons or economic reasons, or simply to preserve their cultural past. In France, in the UK, in the regions of Europe, Roman artifacts such as altars, milestones, and votive works are commonly seen in many of these churches today. And it is not uncommon to find sarcophagi converted into baptismal fonts. We have numerous Roman examples as well as medieval examples associated with either revered individuals or simply, I think, sometimes for practical reasons, as in the case of some of the oil tanks that we uncover and discover in the Pyrenees and the Basque mountainous regions. This stems back to the early Christian period, the theology, when the scriptural theme of being born again fostered enduring associations between the font and the tomb. This symbolism justified, I think, in many cases, the widespread use of Roman and medieval sarcophagi and even Roman bathtubs for baptismal fonts throughout the Latin West. Celebrated examples, some of which are included here in the bottom right-hand corner, for example, is the plum-colored porphyry sarcophagus lid, believed to have been from the sarcophagus of the Emperor Hadrian and the later Otto II, who died in 983. The Baroque composite that you see here was transformed by the workshop of Carlo Fontana for the Vatican, which is where it stands today. We also document the lids, extraordinary works at times, I have to say. And many of them have remained, and some of them have been replaced, of course. The lids began to appear in roughly the early 13th century, when there was a fear of the water being used for non-liturgical and non-Christian purposes at that time. And in fact, it was canon law at that time. You had to have a lid. And it was across the EU, across the United Kingdom as well. And then we still have the evidence today, not just the lids, but also the broken fragments from the stone fonts where the hinges had been removed or damaged, the vessels as well, which is a good telling sign that the object, no matter what it was previously in its life, was indeed used as a baptismal font at that time. Today, the research of scholars like Jean-Claude Gislain in Belgium and Tom Cousins, a marine archaeologist in the UK, who study the Purbeck stone industry and the Tournai and Namur industry, they also help us understand some of this remarkable material. I want to mention that we document as much as possible the settings of the current vessel and its place. We often find the same motifs that are on the font carved on the portals, the capitals, or perhaps reliefs, indicating there was a common workshop, maybe to that particular site, but perhaps a larger regional development. And certainly understanding this context for the vessels helps us understand how it might have belonged to perhaps an earlier church that no longer exists, that could be verified through maybe some of the charters and earlier textual documentation from the period. And it is a challenge, constantly determining the provenance of a font, because they move, they can be mobile, despite the fact that they're made from quite this heavy stone. And certainly many were moved, especially during after the Reformation and the dissolution of the monasteries and abbeys. Some of their abbey churches were converted to parish churches. And it's interesting, in some cases, we've been able to track the font back to where we knew there was a abbey or monastery in close proximity, which is interesting in itself because that explains perhaps some of this involvement by monastic orders. And Claude Gislain in Belgium has done some work on that in terms of Namur and the Belgium fonts. Interesting development there. Now, we also encounter many fonts outside, and that is very unfortunate. It's quite remarkable. And many of them, of course, are very plain and considered by some maybe not significant, maybe not important, but as historians, we know they are important and they can reveal a lot. Usually this comes from a lack of understanding about what some of these simpler plain vessels can reveal about a particular village, town, and development. We have documented about 7,900 disappeared fonts. Disappeared meaning that they were recorded in earlier scholarship print and no longer can be located. Now, not all communities discard. Many are ingenious in terms of how they reuse, preserve, and bring this material back inside in multiple different ways. I have to say, it is incredible what some of the communities are able to do. As you can see here, they recreate the bases, and we have many composite works. You just have to try to unravel the different parts and the different historical periods when they came from. And certainly this Roman sarcophagus was an incredible surprise, converted into a font and put in against the wall. Now, the fonts come in a range of metals, stone, wood, ceramic, clay products. And determining the specific type of wood and stone, however, is a very specialized area. And we don't necessarily have that expertise. So we depend a lot on the available research that's published and that is undertaken by the experts. But whether it is a type of stone or a type of wood, these can convey a tremendous amount of information about the local region, the site, the village, the church, and also in our understanding about the relationships within that particular area with other regions at given times. The users now online can search for generic or some of the more specialized types of stone as seen here, or medium as seen here on the right-hand side of the screen. Extensive geographical information is collected on each vessel, as much as we are able to acquire and obtain. Current and previous. And in some cases, we even have driving instructions. It can be exceedingly difficult to find some of the desolate or villages or towns that have changed names in the scholarship and to locate them today. So we do include all of that within each record. The GIS data, of course, is absolutely central these days, and it is helping us prepare for the next step, the next launch, we hope. So we include basic information, different spellings of the place name. Scholarship going back over centuries. We know the spellings vary, languages, variations as well come forward. And we include all of those in the name. The name of the font is the name of the village or the town or the city in all its spelling variations that we know of in the scholarship. Then, of course, there's the church or the chapel or the institute in which the object is located. If it's in a museum, we include the inventory number. And then as well, all the different geographical divisions, we include that, as well as the broader general regions, which we thought might be helpful for users when they're looking at some of the more general regions like Central America or Northern Europe, etc. Location information is vital for not just tracking the provenance, but of course, the history of the fonts, as many of the vessels originated in different contexts and different sites, as I mentioned previously. Now, just to give you an idea of why the medium of these vessels are so important for historians. These maps illustrate the location of our BSI records for fonts, carved from the different types of stone. And we're talking now roughly late 12th century onward through the Middle Ages. And we have the Purbeck stone, sometimes called the Purbeck marble, in the UK. But we know there are also works from Purbeck located in the EU. It's just that we haven't entered that material yet into the BSI. Then we have the Tournai and the Namur works from the Belgium and the Netherlands region. And then on your right, we have the some, and this is not comprehensive, some of the vessels in BSI now that have been carved from the workshops located on the island of Gotland, which had sandstone, which is rare in the north, as well as limestone. Most of what the Tournai, the Namur, and the Purbeck, these are limestone works. It gives you an idea of the scope of the activity at this time. Now, we do collect a lot of information that perhaps for some may not be considerable interest, but a font shape, measurements, and the drainage system, whether or not it exists, is of course, it tells us a lot about the vessel itself and the workshop it produced it and its function within the community. So we have a fair bit of metadata on these areas. Whenever we can, we note the complete measurements of the objects, the depth, the height, etc. And one of the interesting things that we have discovered, and I have not been able to locate any canon law for this, is the consistent height of medieval fonts, 1 meter approximately for infant baptism. And that was the same from whether we were in Spain or whether we were in northern Sweden, which is really interesting, which obviously points to some sort of network and shared understanding across regions. So measurements also relay important information about the quarry process. This is sometimes, there's not a lot of discussion or a lot of research in terms of all the processes in the organization that went into the development of these quarries that suddenly boomed in the late 12th century going onward in Europe. And the size of the cut bases, for example, can, in some cases, be consistent within workshops. Now, we know those blocks of stones had been transported there and they had been previously cut at the quarry site. So there's a whole preliminary stages that some of these measurements can tell us a lot about. They also tell us a lot about the type of stone. So limestone is fairly shallow in its bedwork in the layers. And so with the development of limestone, we discover there are more pieces to a single work created from limestone than from sandstone. And the drainage, often there's no drainage, which is curious because the church deemed that the water had to be fresh, living water, which meant that it had to be replaced, and it had to drain down into consecrated ground. But many have no drains from the Middle Ages, which of course meant that there were other ways of dealing with this in communities. Now, we also do the general font description so that the users can go in and search for different types of fonts that have been created over the centuries. So we have quite extensive, we have these different codes that we use within the BSI, so they can be searched. There, we have the above ground, as I mentioned, the sunken piscina. We have the stoops. Now, the stoops are kind of interesting because the stoops often we find were originally the first font at a site. They were not as what we think today, perhaps of the smaller basins, but often we find older baptismal fonts being moved into the front porch or to the exterior of the church, and these belong to an earlier period when they were used. We also have the other category. This is where we note whether it's Roman, Islamic, or other artifacts from different cultures. BSI iconography has been central to this project from the very beginning. And we had to find ways of retaining the pictorial data as it appeared on the vessel. So we began with these codes. These codes relate to different parts of a vessel. So the placement of an image in certain periods had significance. Some parts of the vessel were deemed to be more important than other parts, and lesser types of images applied to maybe the underbase and et cetera. It wasn't consistently used this way, but there are regional differences in terms of this. So we use these codes to help us align the sequence of images, because as an art historian, we know that a particular image can have a different meaning in a different context when you look at the overall pictorial program. Here, for example, is a list of the codes and its relation to the Quatling Bow font here. And you can see the codes and the descriptions that we use. And these descriptions here are modeled on the icon class hierarchy. Also, I'm going to show you another example now of the Lingesfö font in Skåne in Sweden. And this depicts the martyrdom of the English Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Becket. Thomas Becket was of great interest in Scandinavia, as in many regions and even in Spain, very much so, and widely supported by the Cistercian order. And in Scandinavia, the Cistercian order was the most powerful. It was the most powerful order in the north. And of course, they mined the resources, etc. So on this image here, you can see from left to right, we have the basin code and the sequence, the one, and we do read from left to right. And it's interesting, sometimes, even when we were reading from left to right, we find workshop artisans sometimes reverse the sequence of images, which is quite interesting to see, because you get a sense of the production process of this material. And you can see the subject codes that we use. And we think this is helpful for users when they search and looking for specific types of subjects. The program continues here on the screen for you, again from left to right. And I think it's self-explanatory in terms of the Traditio Legis and the crowning of the Virgin and the ending with the baptism of Christ on the screen. Now, we did also want to show you something that's frequently overlooked and not considered very much in understanding what this material conveys. That is the existence of heraldic motifs. As of the 13th century, we have motifs on hundreds of vessels across the EU. And they haven't all been identified. We know of researchers who have done a lot of work in this area, and certainly we probably haven't entered everything that exists out there. But this map here shows you the scope of this particular trend within the development of these vessels. And these vessels, of course, illustrate in the motifs those that funded, those that had some sort of authority in towns and villages, some sort of importance in terms of the jurisdiction and in the development of those regions. It's quite interesting. And we have many family names. And many of these family names we find in medieval charters from the region. So we can cross-connect to this other material, which is fascinating. And there's a legacy, of course. We know there's a legacy in these regions as well. Another area, and we use icon class. Again, this is based on the model of the icon class. It doesn't have the numeric and alphanumeric coding, but it has a sense of the hierarchical text, a variation of it. Inscriptions. We have a lot of inscriptions. Again, there is no comprehensive collection except right now within BSI. We know there are regional publications with inscriptions and some projects that deal with regional inscriptions from the earlier centuries. But they tend to be overlooked partly because they're just not known. Now, inscriptions are tricky, very tricky. We have also seen many inscriptions that are added at a later date, just as we've seen pictorial images recarved and added at a later date. So there's always, when you have a work in a community, a lot can happen to that object over time. So it's something to be skeptical of or careful with in terms of using it. And often there's a confusion if there's a date. Sometimes they think it's the provenance of the work. Maybe it's not the provenance. Maybe it's more of a memorial or a memory of an event that was significant for that particular community. Even within bronze works, there's a degree of caution that you must analyze when you look at these dates, because dating the fonts has always been a huge issue. The other component I want to demonstrate to you is the languages. We have numerous languages here on the right-hand side. And here are all the fonts with the inscriptions that we have currently in BSI and the map that display all these different languages. Languages and inscriptions tend to be late 12th century onward in terms of the works. I want to just mention to you copyright, as we are online. Everything that we have photographed is guided by the Common Copyright Code, CC by SA, which applies to the database entries and our images. We do have images that we do not have permission for, and those will have just an icon, and our image files start with the letter N, and we cannot show those. But we do list the source. If we have acknowledgement that there is an image, so the user could track it down through the source. The last steps. This comes to the end of my presentation for you. And we hope that you've had an understanding of the scope and the wealth that remains preserved in these communities. We hope these gems will continue to be preserved through the ages. And we hope we've conveyed a little bit of the historical value of what it gives us as well. And we also wanted to conclude by just mentioning that, as I mentioned before, we have modified this database many times. It's always an enormous task, but here we are again. We are once again looking to expand this database with colleagues we know have been working with technology in specific areas, and we feel we have so much overlap. And we know that if we can connect, which is what we're looking at now, connect these databases, and not just through the linked open data connections, but also, through the use of APIs and so on within our relational databases, we can create and enhance a knowledge base that goes beyond particular types of works and is more holistic in its approach, and hopefully more comprehensive to scholars, and it'll be open source. So we're working right now with colleagues, with our colleagues also at Sigtica, with the documents of early English data sets at U of T and the Mapping Saints project in Sweden. We are collaborating right now on a pilot project to use AI. Going to the next step, checking AI to see its accuracy and efficiency in doing certain tasks, testing it to see how we can move to this next step in our collaborative efforts. And I think that brings me, Jordi, to the end of our presentation today.
Thank you so much, Harriet. Now we can open the floor for participants. So feel free to ask any questions or share insights.
Maybe I should stop sharing.
Congratulations. because I find that this is a marvelous work in order to have a model of classification and catalogation of certain works of art.
Yes.
One of the problems that we have in many countries is that not all the museums and not all the regions have the same model for the catalogation and classification of the works of art. That means that after it's very difficult to cross the information. So, I mean, I think that this is extraordinary and more a perfect, very detailed model of classification. Congratulations. On the
You're
other
very
hand,
kind.
I also try to repeat again that it's very important, this part of the history. In many countries, like often happens in Spain, we have many historians, they go from Roman to the Arab period, ignoring that in the middle we have a very important period of Christian and culture. And the Byzantine, even Byzantine, we have in some parts of Spain.
Yes.
And
Yes.
for instance, in our region, in Murcia, we have a Baptisteria for the 15th century, for the 5th century, and the 6th century, another, in some church. But everybody ignores it. Even politicians, when they speak about the history, they come just from Roman, just jump to the Muslim period, ignoring 2 centuries in the middle. And I think that if we want to understand what's happening in many countries, how they have built up a way of approach even to the religions models, or the religions architecture, the religions practices, is very, very important to turn back and to look at this period with the detail that you did it. Thank you.
Thank you for your words. I have to say that it always astounds us in terms of what the communities preserve and choose to preserve. So we know that in parts of Spain, Islamic ablution vessels were converted into fonts and preserved at certain sites, which is fascinating. And the role of communities in preserving, and when we've done a lot of work in Spain. When we go to these communities, they're very cautious, they're very protective of these vessels when we visit these communities. And they want to know more. They want to know the history, which is, yeah, fascinating.
Yes. But in history, there is, I am quite old, and I look back and I see that also there is not only fashion and some trends that appear and disappear. Also, in in the history,
yes.
we have fashions.
Yes.
In this moment, for instance, it's not very, very in fashion to see the Christian period, the Visigothic, the Byzantine. And when we read the history, we see the big silences about many periods. For me, history is more dangerous many times the silent than the fakes. Because if we look back, we see there is only 3 lines. For instance, for the Phoenicians, a Punic culture in the Mediterranean history, a big for Roman. After we go to the Muslim Islamic period, many times they are bigger than it was. And like this, even the historians, we need to fight against the fashion and the trends that are officially implanted.
Yeah. There's much work to be done.
May I ask a question too?
Yes.
Perhaps. First of all, thank you very much for the presentation, Harriet and Miguel, and thank you for all your work. Congratulations on launching this wonderful website after so many years. I
Thank
think
you.
you've done a wonderful job, because I think this is really one of the very few platforms that brings one specific object type from medieval churches together on a European scale. I'm not aware of any existing websites that, for example, charts medieval altars, for example, which could also be done. Maybe it's even more work, or it's even more complicated, but it could be done. But it hasn't been done. So you've been doing all this work sort of parallel to FRH. because I see a lot of pictures where you also include the people that opened up the churches for you and that showed you the baptismal fonts. So it's all about communities. And I think the whole spirit of FRH is totally in your project too. So I think I'm very glad that you found and that FRH has found you and that we probably hopefully can work together also. I've taken a lot of notes because you said a lot of interesting things. Um, I just want to just for confirmation, is it true that the baptismal fonts are probably the most preserved objects from medieval church interiors, and that they're also usually the oldest? I think the latter is quite easy to confirm, but also the first. Is it the best preserved, the most preserved element?
In many regions, I would say, Miguel's going to add to this. I see his hand go up. In many regions, I would say, yes, that is the case. But as communities gained wealth and economic status, they do replace their fonts. And we see that happening in the Gothic period. Um, the early fonts in Northern Europe, they're more, it's a more ambiguous period, I would say. And we have recently just come back from Ireland. Very interesting area. 3,000 holy wells in Ireland. Incredible. Plus, they have these, I think, Miguel, you can correct me, bullion stones, very small stones, but with multiple uses, mind you, which is part of the uncertainty in the scholarship of how they might have been used. Basically, it's a boulder with a hole in it, and it may indeed have served as a stoop or as some sort of liturgical vessel in baptism. But there's a lot of uncertainty. But these are the types of early works that were actually um, put outside and put in fields and to feed
Yeah.
these very early words because they weren't deemed as significant or important, right? And Miguel, you can jump in. I know you want to say something on this.
Yes, actually, I wanted to sort of address first of all both Christina and Justin on the issue of the fashion. Fonts are fashionable in the sense that they turn different from one period to another, from one country to another, and so on. And when some of them become fashionable, others become unfashionable,
Yeah.
which means that they are discarded. And there are, as Harriet said, over 8,000, I know there are more, but statistically, about 8,000 fonts that have disappeared. Well, some have been destroyed in wars, etc., and others have been simply discarded because the lord of the manor decided that he was going, in 1599, he was going to bring in a new font with his coat of arms. So out goes the old one, and in comes the new one. And then, and this is specifically directed to Justin, because one of these days he and I are going to talk about what the Dutch have done to the to the fonts. I mean, the Reformation introduced all kinds of changes in the fashion, etc., etc. But what happened in the Netherlands, especially, is something that we need to record and we need to document.
It's the worst chapter of your whole project, I'm afraid.
No, but one thing, Justin, that they did, and I really need to get a grasp on this and write about it. I mean, research it, and you are, of course, the best person to help me. The church, the interior of the church is redesigned, whereas the altar was the center and the focus of attention in the pre-Reformation church. After the Reformation is not. And where the font it was the sort of opening to the entry of the church, and that's why it was usually located near the entrance and so on, all of a sudden becomes a little metal dish nailed to the to the pulpit, and And I find that incredibly fascinating. Not only that, but what the Dutch, being also very practical people, which you are, they take the base of the font or the whole font and put it under the pulpit as a support for the pulpit. And you think, oh yeah, well, that's a practical thing and so on. But my thinking is, wait here. We are talking about theological and liturgical relationships here, whereas the baptism and the faith was the root of the earlier church. Now the word becomes the center of the Reformed Church. And that's why they put the font under the pulpit and say the baptism supports the word, not the other way around. It's totally fascinating. And if I may make one comment without attacking the Dutch, the Gotland and the traffic. Harriet has mentioned the creation of quarry. The work in the quarries, and especially with the Cistercians in the north. They were very, very good people at that. But what is fascinating is to learn about the traffic of these works, where they are created and where they end up, and the industry that supports that. There is a very good book, by the way, that you can access very easily. But Gotland fonts at one point become such a huge industry, not just the fonts, but the fonts as part of a larger industry, that they are exported everywhere around the Baltic. So you end up with Gotland fonts in Norway, in Sweden, in Denmark, and you say, well, that's sort of natural and so on. But when you move eastwards, then you find them in Estonia, you find them in Germany, you find them in Poland. So there is a massive exportation and a business, of course. And that alone is just another area that we try to integrate in our research. Anyway, I've talked too much. Sorry. I'll leave my mic now.
Luigi, I see you have your hand raised.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your inspiring lecture, really inspiring lecture. And I had the chance to connect myself just a few minutes later, so probably I lost the introduction to your lecture. And I would ask you, how have you selected, sorry, probably you said, of course, this, but how have you selected your case of study? How have you selected these baptistries? And then if you now you are able to take in your database other baptistry vassals from other country. For example, I do speak from Italy, where of course we have a pretty amount of this vassal. And third question is, have you compared the information regarding the baptistry that you have today with the bibliography regarding vassals in the past? Because especially regarding Gothic vassals and ancient ones, baptistries, we have in Italy, but I think also abroad. I'm sure that there is a collection of drawings, for example, regarding baptistries in England. Have you compared the information with this kind of sources so that maybe you can have also a kind of evaluation of the degree of conservation? Because sometimes the drawings are really precise, and maybe some of these baptistries are now the one you find full of flowers and they are no more inside the church. I don't know, but no, because in the database I've seen, but I didn't have the possibility to read all the voices you put in the PowerPoint. I didn't find the bibliographical sources, which I suppose could be an opportunity also to implement, of course, because we have also to think that these databases, instead, the difference from a book is the fact that you can keep on working upon. No? Thank you.
Thank you. Very good questions. Difficult questions to some extent to answer, but I think I can give you an idea. First of all, it began with my focus on the Scandinavian fonts many years ago, back in the 1990s. And my interest in fonts goes way back, like many medievalists or people who have a particular fashion. I can certainly trace my curiosity about these vessels way back to my childhood. But that was the sort of underlying drive that over the years. Now, in terms of choosing, so because I cannot do site work alone. It's very difficult to do site work and monitor equipment and keep track of everything and figure out what it is you're looking at. When we move beyond the work for the dissertation, of course, the question remained, well, how unique were this obsession with infancy cycles in the north? What are the other works like? We have to look at those. So we gradually just kept expanding. And as I mentioned, it is founded on published works. Now, that was the start. But as the project developed and we got a better understanding of how to work in certain regions, and every region is a different challenge, a different kind of things we have to deal with. It's quite different. We know it was some churches are open, some churches are locked. We went to Ireland, we thought, okay, it'd all be open. No, only the Catholic churches are open. The Protestant are closed because of fear of abuses. So getting in access varies. Working in Spain had its own challenges. We had to, at one point, get permission from the Archbishop to get access. Sometimes we had a very welcoming community. There was no problem. They didn't feel we were going to walk away with their baptismal font. So as we developed our technique and we could afford to do this, we would situate ourselves in a region, and then we would work in that area. We did begin with a tent, so that made us mobile. Early days. We don't do that anymore. But we did discover Europe is full of campsites, and it was quite cheap. And we dream of Westphalia, of course. But today we situate ourselves in one location and do a large circumference of sites. That makes it easier. It also, once you discover the particular regional challenges, you get more work done. It's more efficient, right? To do that way. We have done a little bit in Italy. Italy, we know, is going to require special permissions, contacts for us to do any comprehensive work. So we turn to the work of Anna Maria Ducci and others as much as we can, who live there and who work in those regions to help us. Now, you had the last question, baptistries. Yes, baptistries. Yeah, that was this is an organic project. So we started with iconography, and baptistries, we have many contacts who are specialists in that field at this day, and we know there are some great publications out there. We just have not had the manpower or the funding to expand in that area. We have had internal support from the University of Toronto, but we've had no real major grants. So, it takes time to input and to do this. But we're hoping with the online developments that we're now creating with Sigtica, that we can have more input than just Miguel, who on whose shoulders the weight of all of this metadata has fallen all these years. We do different things within this project, but we know there's a lot out there in terms of baptistries. And yes, you're absolutely right. There can be some remarkable comparisons made between the regions. Very interesting. We are beyond the point of print. We can no longer, we can't publish in print what we have. And of course, it would negate the cross kind of comparisons that you're talking about. So we want to get to that point and add this material, and we do have this as a type of course, as a type of site. In fact, Miguel also notes the baptistry. We worked with some folks in the U.S. Who were doing a lot of work in that area from a few years back, but their project didn't really get launched, so there's some lost material there. But yeah, no. Did I answer your questions?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, I have a last question, perhaps. In this moment, I'm very worried about the lost, and the people don't know what the use of many of the things that they find in the church. They don't know what was the use of the rites that were behind this piece, Baptisteria and other things. And the tourists, they don't know what was the baptism. Many of them, they don't know nothing. In general, I believe that the guides, even if they are good guides, that some things they are not good, they are novelists or something like that. But the good guys, many times even they don't know what was the use of what was behind, what was the use of this piece. And I believe that perhaps we need to discuss one day the need to recognize the heritage, no material, the material heritage, but also the immaterial heritage that is going hand by hand with the use. We have the right and a piece that is going for this. An author is dying for some rights. And everything was in a church was for one reason. And I think that now new generations, they don't know what was the right, what was the religion, what was the reason that these pieces had been built. And
Absolutely.
I'm asking you if in your work you find ignorance of what was the use of these pieces that you have, vessels and other things.
Of course. And religious beliefs and ideologies, they shift and have changes historically, of course.
Yeah.
And we encounter, and when I talk to young students that we may be working with, they've never heard of a baptismal font, of course, and they don't know what baptism is, of course. And that's quite common. But I think you raise a good point. I think it's important to recognize these remains of the past as important cultural works, cultural heritage works. And I think that there is possibly a way to do this. I often thought of this, but I've never gone down this path. UNESCO does create sort of a general respect and recognition for important sites. I don't know if this is too far-fetched an idea, but it seems to me that UNESCO could recognize some of these materials as, and we know there are a lot of villages and towns that are abandoned. They're no longer, but there's a church and there are remains of the past. So some sort of recognition for this vessel might be an important way, if it's UNESCO or another way, that of course emphasizes the cultural heritage and regional developments associated with this material that might again make more sense to the next generation. Just a thought. I'm just throwing it out as a possibility. But you're right.
Thank you very much. And congratulations again.
My pleasure. It's our passion.
Great. Well, we're a couple minutes past the hour, so maybe we can leave it here. I guess we could continue this discussion endlessly. It's such an extraordinary initiative and such detailed analysis of these baptismal fonts. I particularly found so interesting all these reuses, from Roman baths or Muslim ablution vessels. It's quite incredible how this has been, this transition has taken place through time. In any case, we'll send the recording to all registered participants. There were quite a few more registered that maybe couldn't make it, and I'm sure they'll find it equally interesting. And thank you so much, Harriet. Thank you so much, Miguel, and thank you to all participants for joining today's talk.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. We're very grateful, and it's lovely to meet you all. Thank you.